live.
All right. Stream live is Jeff Harmon is streaming live.
Yeah, we are going live.
Grand Rising, everyone.
Grand Rising,
Thank
everyone.
you so much for joining us.
Yes.
We've got this full moon. I can feel it. Can everybody feel it?
We sure do.
Can you feel it, Jeff?
Okay, I feel it. Absolutely. It's going to affect everybody really different, you know. I mean, this is actually called a hunter's moon, but also it's called a supermoon. You know, a lot of people say, well, why is it a supermoon? Well, there's something called apogee and perigee, which are fancy words. It just means apogee means, see, the moon's orbit around the Earth is elliptical. It's not like a circle. So what happens is the moon goes farther and closer to the Earth. Apogee is when it's real far, and perigee is when it's close. So it's at perigee right now, which they call a supermoon, meaning its orbit is closest. So it looks brighter, it looks more powerful, and it actually is because it's closer. The reflection of the light is closer. So that's why they call it that. And also, too, I have to say the proximity of the moon makes the tide stronger. The gravitational pull is probably a lot stronger. You know, NASA, they know a lot about this stuff. They studied the planetary motions. I actually remember in the late 70s, early 80s, I was talking to a couple of guys that were designing these early computer programs, and they were actually in contact with NASA. And they were saying how these computer programs that we're using in astrology are exceedingly accurate. In fact, NASA is using the same ephemeris. Ephemeris is just a fancy word for it. It's a kind of a codex of where all the planets are. And you talk about synchronicity, the timing of these planets is like not kind of close, it's to the millisecond, even though they might have warbles and so on and so forth. But we are in a synchronistic machine to the millisecond. But back to the moon. The other thing is the Farmer's Almanac. That's where the hunter's moon came from. You know, you could see better at night and all that. So there's a lot of different references to that. But it is powerful. I will give it that.
Very.
And very. And there's been a lot of statistical studies done on this where literally, you know, they find the emergency rooms and accidents and violence tends to increase on supermoons as well as full moons. So the data is actually in on that. It's not just, you know, a kind of wives' tale. It's actually very powerful. So if you're a tropical astrologer right now, you're going to say, wow, the moon is void of course. And what does that mean? Well, void of course is a term that means it's not making any major aspects while it's in the sign it's in. And, you know, once it leaves the sign, then it will begin to make other aspects. So, and of course, these are the major aspects. Now, if you're a Vedic astrologer, you're going to notice, oh, wow, it's not void of course at all. It's at the very beginning signs of Aries. And it's actually in a lunar mansion called Ashvini. And here's another reason why the moon might be a little intense. It's ruled by Ketu. Ketu is the moon's south node, also known as the tail of the dragon. It's another eclipse point from the northern node eclipse point. So it tends to be a little wacky. And it's also in the sidereal sign of Aries. So again, there's a lot of mysteries to the moon, a lot. And I have to tell you, in my experiences of doing electional astrology, which is picking auspicious times to do things, I set gems by them. I do surgery elections for people. They'll talk to their doctor and say, you know, I got to go under the knife. So I'll pick a good day out of the, you know, dates that the doctors give, selling, buying real estate. I do a lot of that, closing deals, signing contracts, all that. You know, it just puts a better energy on things. And what's so important is I always look at the moon. And that's why I bring that up. Same thing with interrogation astrology, also known as prashna. If you got the moon making an ill aspect, like a square or a conjunction to a malefic or an opposition or some other malefic aspect, you're likely to find it won't go that good. And so it's a really interesting thing, you know. And of course, you've seen that as well. You know, Ella, you've experienced that, haven't you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Yeah, and I'm sure everyone else has as well.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Yeah, but I
it's
mean, is in the observation of kinda looking over my shoulder when we have worked on certain things, getting ready for shows, and I'd shown you things, yeah.
oh gosh,
So
it's so wild. It's so wild, and it's interesting. I always experience this during a full moon. I do not sleep like literally at all on the full moon, like the night before that, and it just shines. Part of the reason why I think is because it shines through my bedroom window, even with the blinds closed. But I can definitely feel that powerful energy, and this one
sure.
is a weird full moon for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, it's
This
very
is a weird one.
powerful. Well, you gotta remember, you can't just look at the moon, and I've been mentioning for a long, long time that, we've had Uranus, which is now in what we call the Pleiades. Now, the siderealists will notice that by the sidereal sign of Taurus, meaning Uranus has gone into that. Plain English, this is a very dangerous time. And again, look what we've got going on in the world. You've got Israel and Iran and Hezbollah and everybody else all cooking over there. You've got the Ukrainian, Russian situation. We've got other things we probably don't hear about. China and Taiwan are definitely heating up more and more over there. So this is a very dangerous time in the world. So you got to look at the moon is always what they call the alchemical co-mixer of spirit into matter. And it's also reflectionary, meaning that it tends to, I think there's a lot of things going on with karmic energy as well as just, you could say the movement of the world, collective consciousness that is interacting with this whole celestial matrix much more than we know. That's why free will and thoughts and all that stuff are so important, because it really does seem to intermix with it all. And the moon is always been called the co-mixer of all energy. You always blend the moon in with whatever you're looking at. Very, very important. And I notice in readings, I've had so many readings over the years. The first thing I look at is, where is Saturn to the birth chart moon? Those are called sadhisate. And so many people go through that. We all do. 3 times in our lifetimes, we will get Saturn transiting our moon. And it's not only the 7.5 years before, during, and after the moon, it's also when the Saturn is 4th from the moon, 10th from the moon, and 8th from the moon, 7th and 8th. So it's like when you really look at it, when I first started studying the Nadi and the Vedic astrology, I went, wow, did we ever get a break? When you look at Saturn's juxtaposition from the moon, we're always going through some kind of a trial and tribulations, like the trout swimming up the stream. We've always got that force against us. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, it doesn't. That's funny that you said when you saw that. Wow, do we ever get a break? Sometimes it doesn't feel like it, or maybe you get a break for a couple of days, and then it's like, bam, you're back in the what do you call it? The washing machine.
yeah, you're back in the washing machine, stuck on spin cycle, right?
Yeah,
That's what
yeah,
I
yeah,
say. This is always the washing machine stuck on spin cycle, no doubt about that. It's
yeah.
it's
Well,
yeah.
Cosmere is mentioning, good morning, everyone. Hope you're doing really well. Cosmere is mentioning that he made a prayer on the full moon. Now, that's interesting. I personally have never made a prayer on the full moon. I always do it on the new moon. So speak to that, Jeff, the full moon prayer versus the new moon prayer.
Well, I mean, I think anytime we do any kind of meditation or thought, it's interesting because Kashmir is from India, and that culture is so much different than the West. Most people in the West, they go to either their church or their synagogue or whatever they're doing, and literally we live a different life in the West. In India, at least the older portions of India, they'd have what they call remedial measures. There's all kinds of mantras and prayers. And what's interesting about these, and this kind of reminds me of the Gregorian chants and some of the old Hebrew stuff with the Psalms, there's actually intonations and phonetics that is used in these mantras that are actually to the planets. I was studying with an old guy from years ago from India, and we would always do these mantras right before we'd study or do astrology. And a lot of Westerners say, well, that's idolatry to planets, right? Actually, no, it's not. If you really get into all these ancient mantras from India, they almost all of them begin with Om. Well, what is Om? Om is the oldest chant in the world. It means God. It means God please, or God whatever. So they were not polytheistic, even though they knew about all the lower things. It's another interesting thing I've been studying a lot, is I've been going back to the Egyptian Book of the Dead and other books like that. And I've been looking at parallels in these cultures to reincarnation and all of that stuff. Because if you study Vedic astrology and you study the Nadi astrology, especially, if you don't accept the possibility of reincarnation, you probably won't understand it very well, because it's actually completely built on that premise. And, we're all here stuck in the wash machine on spin cycle. And we're all saying, geez, when does it get better? When does, this let up? Or why did I get this situation, this relationship, this, childhood, or this job, or whatever else we're going through in these cycles? And it's interesting, going back to Kashmir and the mantras, there were prayers that were to offset not only the karmic energy that was coming at you, but most importantly, and I didn't know this until I'd studied with some of the older guys in India, it was to condition the lower conscious mind to not react so harshly to the energies coming at you. Again, here we go. There's that analogy of driving a car. If you're conditioned to really watch your conditions, or you could say your environment, you're probably going to react a lot more intelligently and safely. If you're just whipping along, playing around on your phone and whipping in and out of traffic, and you don't care who's where, you're probably going to have an accident sooner or later. So it's the same thing with these mantras and prayers. It was to condition the conscious mind to spiritual awareness of the interaction that we were receiving. And yeah, there's so many mantras. I actually have books that are this thick full of mantras. It's absolutely amazing. And very powerful stuff, very powerful. Because remember, we emit thought form elementals out of the third eye chakra, and that is connected to the pineal gland, which was always known to be so important to consciousness. And I think science is going to find sooner or later that spiritual consciousness of the spirit and the soul are not just with the brain, but they might be coming through the portal of the third eye chakra. I had worked with a gentleman who was really psychic. He was called a rishi, a seer. That's what they called the ancient Vedantics. Just like in the West, we call our prophets and saints, right? They're seers. They actually had communications with angels. And of course, there's many really intuitive people, psychic and intuitive, and they have their third eye chakra really opened up. And it was interesting. One of the guys I studied with said, yes, I see through the third eye. And I went, wow, that's really cool. It's really, really cool. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's cool stuff.
Third eye chakra. Right
yeah,
there.
Third eye chakra. Yeah.
Madam Kelly is joining us, and she's saying that she's going to put water out tonight, and she puts her intention into the water. And so the full moon amplifies that.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff. Manly P. Hall comes to mind. He wrote in his book, if anyone ever buys that book, it's called The Secret Teachings of All Ages. And he mentions in there a whole section on alchemy. And it's interesting how the moon was really about that. In fact, many of the alchemists would put glass plates out to catch the dew in the morning during certain astrological aspects, and then they would pour it in and use it for different alchemical purposes, and also drink the water. Pretty wild. So this is, really fascinating when you look at the ancient cultures, how much they knew about the celestial energies and the ways that they use them. That's why I cast gems. I work with a caster because it's a lot of, chemicals and stuff and mess. So there's a centrifuge that we use when I cast pendants and rings and whatever else. And we literally cast them at a good astrological time. Why? Do you know that it's been proven scientifically? It's called the Kisco Effect. and Kisco, they were a scientific team. They took all these metallic cell salts and they proved that when the moon and other aspects were positive, meaning positive, meaning sextiles, conjunction to benefics, or trines, the metallic molecular structure was stronger in metals and also in various different substances that would form. And when it was not good aspects, to malefics or, squares, oppositions, or conjunctions of malefics, the molecular structure wasn't as strong. And they were doing this, literally analyzing the molecular structure under microscopes. So there's a lot to that. And I think that's awesome, to catch that energy, because the whole world is really the spiritual, or I should say, the physical manifestation of spirit into matter. It's really a magic planet, even though we're all kind of going through our own quiet, tribulations, and not so quiet either, too, I might add. But, it's still a divine place
Right.
that is very, very divine.
Yeah,
Yep.
you got that right. Maggie's joining us. She's new to the channel. Welcome, Maggie. She's saying that she's going to start organizing her music, doing more of that, and watching less television. And I'm right there with you. I haven't watched television since 2020, and it's kind of changed my life, honestly. Yep.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting about music and, how the music has changed. I have to say, most of the people I talk to have felt like the music industry is kind of going in the sewer, especially probably the last 10, 15 years, right? So, very interesting. My camera just went out again, but here, I'm going to put that on you for just a second.
It did. It went out.
Well, it came back. It actually came right back. Sorry. So, anyways,
Absolutely. Everything's changed over the years. Are you kidding?
Oh God, it really has.
Everything's changed. Everything. Music, everything. We've changed, right? With all the technology, all the AI, since COVID, I noticed that we're not making the connection the way we used to.
I agree. I agree.
So much has changed. So much has changed.
It really has. Yeah.
Joining us, and she's asking, do you think the moon can change crystals and gems? You were just speaking to that in a sense, but how does the moon relate to that energy?
Well, that's a good question, because I think gems and crystals are really magical. I've been studying gems and crystals now for 30 something years. And, I got exposed to it years and years ago. I had a teacher said, Jeff, you must wear this particular gem. And I was studying Vedic astrology, and I thought, wow, this is interesting, because it's not my birthstone. It's a different stone than my birthstone. And he said, well, look at the yogas in the chart. And then he explained to me something called Vedic planetary gemology. So one gem can not just fit all. There's certain gems you want to wear at certain times throughout your life, and that parallels doshas that you're in. Doshas are time lords, meaning, if you get a Vedic astrology reading, first thing out of any Vedic astrologer's mouth is, what dosha are you in? Now, for anybody not familiar with that, a dosha is a time period. Dosha is condition. So dosha is with an A. So if you just change a vowel, you get a different meaning. So in Ayurvedic astrology, dosha means conditions. So anyways, what was so fascinating is studying gems. I really got into it because I felt so much power. The key is the gem cannot be lab grown, because they're everywhere right now. If you jump on the internet, a lot of people are selling gems that are lab grown. And if you buy a lab grown gem, you must stand out on the porch and light your money on fire. They're going to look beautiful, but they're not going to have any energy. So back to her issue, not only the moon, but I find the celestial influences really affect different gems. And when you study Vedic planetary gemology, like, you'll find that blue sapphire is ruled by Saturn. And they say the archangels and the spirits in that planet have a lot to do with the formation of that gem in the earth as it cools for potentially millions of years. And of course, we come along and mine them, right? And make gems out of them. Yellow sapphire is with the archangels of Jupiter. See, Mars is the archangel of Mars, or red coral. Red coral forms in the sea. So all these different gems, rubies for the sun. And when you study all this stuff and you start looking at the crystal shapes of gems, you go, wow, there's no two exactly alike. Though it's interesting how each class of gems, see, all your precious gems, they all have the same type of crystals, but they undulate in various ways. And I'm sure that's a lot to do when they were originally formed. Most of this stuff is formed by volcanic activity, heating and cooling, and then it cools in the earth for many, many years. But I've done so many gemstones for people, and talismans and pendants, and it's really quite a science in Vedic planetary gemology. And everyone that I've done them for, they always say, wow, I can really feel this. And it's a profound thing to get into. And there's also a procedure. Not only do I cast the gems piece at a good time, be it a ring or a pendant, but I also place the gem in the piece at a good astrological time to your birth chart. So it becomes not a piece of jewelry, but a talisman, which is really powerful. And then there's a procedure that you cleanse it with fire, water, and earth, and you place it on a yantra. And that's an angelic square that actually has the mathematical imprint of the archangel of that planet. And there's a prayer known as a mantra that you chant, projecting your third eye chakra intentions over the gem prior to wearing it. So it becomes really a talisman. And this is a lost art that I've been trying to restore for years. And it's really been a lot of fun. A lot of people have reported, wow, I can really feel this. After about 6 months of wearing the proper gems, you can really tell it when you take off. I actually broke a chain a while back, and I got on the freeway and I just felt verklempt. I felt like, I felt, just kind of weird. And I feel down, oh my God, my chain broke. So I put the gems in a bowl. So I turn around, I come back and I put a synthetic cord on till my new chain either got fixed or I bought a new one. And right away, within 5-10 minutes, I'm right back. So it's really, really powerful stuff.
Yeah.
I used to, when my son was little, I would take him, to the ocean, or we'd go in a pool or a river or something. And I always take my gems off. That's the only time I ever take them off, is if I go in a river or an ocean, because I recommend not wearing them if it ever comes off in the currents or whatever. And I would leave them in the trunk of the car purposely for like an hour, right, on the way home. And I felt like the steering wheel's getting bigger. I felt like John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd and Saturday Night Live back when it was good, in the 70s, where I got small, right? And it was wild. It really was an amazing experiment, to hear come back.
Yes, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So we've got Jessica joining us this morning, and she's asking about the ancient practices of prayer and connecting with the moon in those ancient ways. Do those practices still assist us in this day and age, with us we're so inundated with all these malefic energies? And that's a great question.
Yeah, I don't think, it is a great question. I don't think, ever that modern society could negate that. That's my opinion, at least. Personally, I think the only thing that's changed is us as, society and all that. The human mind and the power that the human mind generates. It's interesting how emotion and belief are one of the strongest components of any of this stuff. The third eye chakra emits thought form elementals. And, speaking to the lady before about water, look at Dr. Emoto. If anyone's not heard of him, he's the guy who wrote the books Messages in Water. And he wrote several books before he died. I got to meet him in Tucson. Amazing guy. He was the scientist who took water and he would freeze it after it was exposed to either prayers or some type of environment, whether it was like a sacred shrine or people where violence had happened. And he found invariably all these different chants and prayers left what they call sacred geometry in the water. Fear, anger, worry, discord always come out looking like gobbledygook. So he's proven, in my opinion, beyond a reasonable doubt, that thoughts are literally things, that what we think and what we believe. Well, this is the interesting thing about religions, and we also see it in the business world. Look what's going on right now with the mind control stations we're listening to on this election. It's all about emotion. If you look at, even military training, it's all about getting someone to be emotional about whatever it is you're doing. And emotion is like the voltage behind these thought form elementals. And interestingly enough, so is belief. So, does it negate modern society from these ancient techniques? I believe no. And I think if you're doing it because you're supposed to, then it's probably not going to have too much power. But if you're doing something, whether it's a prayer or even anything your goals are set towards, those are creating thought form elementals too. When you're emotional about it and you're determined, all these words, determined, emotional, set in your ways, or you could say, someone that's exceedingly, intent on achieving a goal, their thought form elementals are going to be really powerful because the human mind is a thought form elemental generation machine, which gets into karma because, again, uh, R.K. Rao, I believe, I don't know if I had his first letters right. He is a Indian astrologer who I really respect. And he spent a lot of time here in the United States up until the 90s. He's getting quite old now. But he's written a lot about the ancient scriptures where they talk about elementals that stick to the etheric double. If anyone's read The Magus of Strovolos, one of my favorite books, he's a Christian mystic, where he speaks about the etheric double that surrounds the body. Excuse me. And this gets into karma because the thought form elementals that you create by your lifelong kind of desires and goals actually stick with you after life, which we call death, after death. And that is in the auric field that reincarnates. And they say we keep reincarnating until these elementals are depleted and the astral etheric double dissolves. And then we absorb back up all these experiences of incarnations into the wisdom of the soul. And on the tree of life, that's actually called Hokmah, which means wisdom of the soul. And all these incarnations get remembered. And we're blocked from remembering that during these incarnations. That's why free will is such a big thing. And mantras and prayers and all these things, whatever, methods anyone uses, is really a big deal. We're doing mantras and prayers every single day of the week, whether we know it or not, just by the thoughts and goals that we hold. And the more we understand the power of thought, I think is really key because it interacts with the astrological energies. And what's even more mysterious, astrologers run around and say, oh, it's the astrology doing it. No, it's not. It might be the connection that the astrology is portaling, or you could say transmitting from the soul root, which comes from the past life reincarnational desire. So this matrix of astrology might be a lot more complex than we know because all these planets are interconnected to all of us souls in a very unique way. And I think it's much deeper than we'll ever truly know. It's pretty wild stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. Hi, Tucker. Thanks for joining us. Tucker's saying the saying Om sounds like the word home. I've always felt that whenever I meditate with Om, it always brings me to home. And he's saying, and humming a song also mimics Om. We subconsciously all crave to be in everlasting peace. That is so true. We all crave that. That Om is so beautiful. And we want to go home to the true home. I think that's what Tucker is referring to.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good analogy. Om is one of the oldest chants in the world. It means God. It's the meaning of God or divinity, if you will. So
Right.
it's a very, very powerful chant. I'm actually amazed at the complexity of mantras, and it's a science literally of the mind and of the spirit. And there's so many mantras that are in existence, and some of them, may have been lost. And they are, in fact, I believe the Egyptians had them too. Almost every culture had some method of chanting and prayers. And what's so interesting is the phonetics that are contained in them. I really was fascinated by the vowel and the consonant sounds that are encrypted into these mantras. And this is, I think, what was lost with the Psalms in the West too. They are actually, in fact, if anyone reads the Psalms, you'll see it actually says a song by, such and such, by David or whatever. And they actually said there was intonations and certain phonetic sounds. Now that was probably done originally in Aramaic or Hebrew, and most of the older mantras in India were done in Sanskrit, Tamil, Dravidian, and there was a couple of other mixtures of language. But Sanskrit is certainly one, and Tamil is another one that's very, very old that permeates most of Southeast Asia. Very ancient stuff. And the phonetics and the sounds in them are really important to have correct. There's a mantra that's actually called the Maha Mrityunjaya Yantra. And when I first learned it, I went, wow, this is complex, right? There's all these intonations and vowel sounds. And I was told you need to get it exactly right. And there's a yantra, meaning a sacred diagram that you are supposed to project your third eye intentions into it. And it's to alleviate karmas. And, us in the West, we're more interested in new cars. We're more interested, in getting the rent paid and the bills paid or the mortgage paid or whatever it is, and, daily life. But it's interesting how many people that I know who are very successful in businesses, they spend a lot of time meditating and writing out goals. If anyone's ever started Think and Grow Rich or taken a self-help motivational speaking class, Tony Robbins comes to mind, Zig Ziglar, all these people going back ways, you had Napoleon Hill was one of the biggest ones, but clearly it's all about energizing the mind. Well, they did this, these ancient rishis, Tibetan lamas, etc., did this with mantras by energizing certain things that they wanted to create. In fact, the Tibetan lamas, they used to bring these students up into the mountains and they would do sand castles and they would create elementals, thought form elementals that were so powerful through the concentrated efforts of their thoughts that when they would come down into the villages, the people would freak out because they'd see these auras around them. You ever notice when you watch certain people, they're very driven, they're very focused. Look at fighters when they go in the ring. They're not, hey, bud, how are you? No, they're ready to go. They're ready to go. So this applies to every element of life. And again, it's free will. And it's a very interesting thing. And it shows up in the astrology. There was another study, the Guaquilin studies, looked at statistical analysis of athletes, business people, doctors, scientists, people who are murderers, bad people. And they invariably found that the astrology really reflected the traits of that individual. And I've seen, look at Mike Tyson. We should do a study on him sometime. Nobody could touch this guy. He'd go in, that's why they called him Iron Mike. He'd go in the ring and knock everybody down in 2 seconds, or very shortly, he'd knock them down. And then he ran out of gas, and I've seen this, where he just couldn't make it happen anymore, no matter what he tried. And these are shown by progressions and doshas in the charts. Absolutely fascinating. And I've seen this in my own life where you get certain times where, you're just unstoppable. You're like Popeye on spinach. And you'll usually find it's very strong transits, progressions, and dosha combinations that give us that juice, that gas that is very, very powerful. Yeah, and when they go away, you run out of gas.
It goes away, and you're kind of like, okay, I need to look at life now. I really need to. I really need to dig
very well.
here. let's jump back to the gemstones for a second, because Jessica's making an important point here that you always make as well. She's saying it's important to know your chart, to know which crystals and gems to use at which time for beneficial results. If it's the wrong time, you can harm yourself. And not only if it's the wrong time, but if it's the wrong gemstone, you can really harm yourself. Like, I know you can't wear blue sapphire, Jeff.
Yeah,
It
I
actually
cannot
makes
wear
you
blue
feel
sapphire. That's
ill.
because I have Saturn on the moon. If I wear blue sapphire, I literally feel ill. I kind of like, ugh, I'm just heavy.
Yeah, it
So,
just shows you how powerful these gemstones are. And Rocky Stucci Jr., great to have you here today, Rocky. He's also referencing the gemstones. He's saying, if you base your gem off your dasha, would you wear it based off of your Mahadasha or Antradasha? I'm under a Jupiter Mahadasha and, with a Sun Antradasha and a Kanya Lagna. Uh, so which would you pick?
well, you want to pick the Mahadasha. The reason why, if anybody's ever ridden a horse or a motorcycle over bumpy terrain, the first thing you'll notice, if you fight that machine or that horse, you're going to get pounded. So the theory is, this is one of the analogies, is that the planets are seizers and graspers of the aura. They actually call them graha in Sanskrit, which means Caesar or grasper of the aura. That's why I always say, forget Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus. This really is truly the soul matrix of the soul. So the principle is, if you have this energy with all of its yogas in the chart aspecting you for a period of time. I mean, some of these dashas can last up to 19, 20 years. Saturn's 19 years, Venus is 20, the sun is 6, the moon is 10. So these are long periods of time, they're not just a short time. So the Mahadasha is always good to fortify. Now, depending on the Antardasha, it is good to wear it in the meantime while you're in the Antardasha, but they're often much shorter depending on the dasha you're in. And then there's always wear gems. See, the Yoga Karaka gem, which is a strange word that just simply means a planet or 2 planets or more that rule angles and trines in the chart. So you really have to do the analysis of the Vedic astrology. If you don't have a Vedic astrology program, and it's really good to have someone very experienced, because I look much deeper than that. I also look at not only the Mahadasha, the Yoga Karaka planet, I also look at planets that you want to strengthen. You want to draw a last breath with that gem. That's an always wear gem. You always want to wear. And another one too, you want to look at the Atma Karaka. You also want to look at the Navamsha. The Navamsha is a 9th divisional or 9th harmonic chart. And you want to look at how that is strengthened or weakened in certain key planets in the chart. And those are gems too you want to select. So yeah, and then you have a Rudra Lagna, you have Chandra Lagna, you have the Suryaya Lagna, which is of course the sun and the moon and the ascendant. Those are the 3 biggies. And so it takes a lot of analysis to really find out which screw you want to turn with wearing which gem. But they really have a profound effect. I actually did Kirlian photography. It's on my website. And I was actually amazed at how powerful it was. I laid my hand on a plate. I had no gem. My auric field showed up. And then I grabbed the yellow sapphire and it just blew the plate out. It was like you could just see this huge aura around my finger. I'll put that on the screen sometime. I don't want to fish it out right now, but a lot of fun for this stuff. So, and again, there are also elixirs that you can drink from gems. In other words,
I know you've done that. I know
yeah,
you've done that.
it's really powerful. And it's interesting because the gemstones seem to, they say, really embed into the, whole intestinal tract, and has a very powerful effect.
I'd love to
Yeah,
try that sometime.
cool.
That's got to be a really expensive beverage, though.
Yeah, right. It's a little bit better for you than a lot of the beverages we drink. No question.
True.
So,
I'm going to jump to Melissa for a second, Jeff. She's asking about her children. She's saying, what placement, house, or planet do you recommend to look at in your child's chart to know how best to parent and guide them to help them overcome their soul's challenges? She has a 10-year-old son and she has a 6-year-old daughter, and she's pregnant with her third child. Congratulations. So she's asking that
Yeah,
question, and
wow.
I know, Jeff, it has a lot to do with their transits and progressions. She is pointing out here that the sun is Leo's sun, Sag rising, the daughter. She's pointing all that out, but I know it has to do with
Sure.
a lot to do with the transits and progressions.
Yeah, absolutely. I that's a great question. I do a lot of parents, and there's so many great stories and so many sad stories that you hear about when you deal with parents and children. And I think the biggest thing I always like to look at first is the compatibility between the parent and the child. It's very interesting to look at that because I find some parents and children are actually soulmates. They've clearly been together before. You can see it in the yogas in both the parent and the children's chart, and other ones are rivals. You can see it's really rough. And I've heard so many stories. Well, how could my child have done that or done this or that? And I've also heard stories like, this one just takes care of me. And you can see it in the yogas in the chart. Universal love is always Moon and Venus and Jupiter and the Moon. I have that with my son, and I kind of spoiled him a little bit because we get along too good. But those kind of aspects are, no matter what you do, I will always look to the positive side of whatever you did, and hard aspects are rough, like Sun, Saturn. It's like, where are you going? When are you going to be back? And who are you talking to? So it's always dominant. And Moon and Mars, it's like the fur flies. I just had a person who is into deep psychology call me up a while back, and in a relationship, and they fought like cats and dogs. And no matter what psychology was used, they fought like cats and dogs. And I mean, they literally scratch each other's eyes out. And I had one couple, they would be on the floor choking each other every time they had a Mars Pluto aspect. And then when it went away, they'd get along, but they'd still fight. And these energies we all have with everybody we meet. I mean, it's like zebras are zebras and tigers are tigers. And it's really good to be aware of that, because if you're a parent that really cares about your children, you can really micro analyze why that's happening. Like when people have Moon Mars aspects, they take a sledgehammer to your emotions. It's like in your greatest hour of need, when you really need some nurturing and, patting on the back, they'll come in and kick you, or take a wire brush to your back. It's like, whoa, it's like, how could you do that to me when I really needed support? Right. And when you understand that that's how that person is in your dynamics, you react differently. It's like driving the car. You don't pull out in front of the Mack truck doing 40. You're not going to win, or the freight train crossing the railroad crossing without a gate. So it's like you operate different. You start to see that's one dynamic. The other thing is children, just like all the rest of us, go through some very dramatic times in their childhoods, depending on the yogas in the chart. Like I talked to some people, it's like, oh my God, my childhood was charmed. Well, you should see the dasha they are in. You should see the yogas between the mother or the father. And oftentimes you see where one parent gets along really well and the other one doesn't. And it's like hatred and jealousy and all this stuff. So that was a dynamic I started studying in my childhood. I went, whoa, why did, I grew up in Krakatoa, and many people have. And I understood. I went, wow, this is a different way of looking at your rational, responses. And you start seeing, well, okay, it's not me, it's the dynamics of the situation karmically playing itself out. And you tend to look at it as, okay, I'm an experiencer. I agreed to play and sit in on this, crap game or poker game or whatever else you want to refer to it as. And, we all have these dynamics. So children, it's really fun to look at the cycles. I mentioned, I had a number of times I've had parents who had really challenging situations with their children in school. And we would find really malefic transits or progressions going on. And right when they got done, the child bounced right back and everything was okay. And some of them last a long time. Some of them are short in duration. And it's kind of creepy how accurate the astrology showed that.
Yeah. So the way to help them is to really understand their charts and what they're going through. and to just have
It
compassion
helps.
for that and know it does help a lot to know when a certain time period might come to an end and there will be a shift.
You bet. Absolutely.
We're all
And
looking for the 20 years of Venus.
yeah, you got that right. Yeah, as long as your Venus is good. See,
Right,
that's the other
right,
cool thing. I've seen
right.
benefic planets become what they call temporal benefic. If you've got horrible aspects on a dosha and it's in a like debilitated state, or it's debilitated in a vamsha, that
Yeah.
dosha can take you out. Um,
Wow.
it's really an interesting dynamic when you start looking at the power of these yogas in the chart. That's why astrology is just not sun signs. You're not all Aries and Pisces and Geminis. You got to look at the yogas in the chart and the configurations. And you can do this in Western astrology, tropical too. It's very, very accurate. And you can look at it from both perspectives and see some absolutely stunning stuff. And that's why I like using them both, because they really give you I think, a much broader picture. And location astrology too. I've seen people move and the whole family dynamics change. Why? Because everybody's location astrology changed, you know, so for better or for worse. So it's really powerful.
Fascinating, fascinating, fascinating. I know you have to go, Jeff.
I kind of
Thank you,
do. Yeah.
thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, so much for the interaction, joining us, sending so many blessings to you all. Kazmir, just shouting out to you. We're going to be communicating with you tomorrow through email. So just so you know that, thank you. And take good care, everyone. And we'll see you on Monday. Happy full moon.